everybody. Welcome to this December 1st meeting of the Council Budget and Effectiveness Committee. We'll start with introductions. My name is Ed Driggs. I'm the committee chair. Other committee members? Ms. Ajmira?
Dimple Ajmira, committee member.
Mr. Graham?
Malcolm Graham, committee member.
Council member, Mayor Pro Tem Isold.
Oh, hi everybody. Julie Isold.
All right, other people in the room, please.
Kelly Flannery, CFO.
Ryan Bergman, Budget.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Marie Harris, Strategy and Budget.
And do we have anybody else online?
Tom Murray, CRVA.
Greg McDowell, City Auditor.
Phil Rieger, General Services.
Tina Adams, Internal Audit.
Jennifer Smith, General Services.
Brent Cagle, City Manager's Office.
I think that's
Internal Audit.
good. Looks like that's everybody. Good to see people online. The room felt awfully empty here. So I guess first we'll start with an overview of the agenda. Mr. Bergman.
Certainly. We'll start with a capital projects audit update. This is a update from July when the internal auditor presented to the committee. Second, we will have a policy that our CFO, Ms. Flannery, will discuss around tourism projects. Third, we'll have a ongoing review of the city's ethics policy, and Mr. Baker will join us very soon. And then fourth as well, Mr. Baker will also discuss the council virtual meetings provisions.
Okay, thank you. So our first item is the capital projects audit update. I just want to remind the committee this is a follow-up to a conversation we had with the internal auditor some months ago, in which he reported to us that there were certain deficiencies that were identified in our capital projects management. And so we did ask him to follow up on that and to report back to us, and what we're about to hear is, I think, an encouraging update to the effect that we have resolved some issues and are making progress on others. But with that, Brent, did you want to speak?
Yes, sir. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you to all of the committee members for having us back to present. I think that I agree. I think this is encouraging news. The City Manager's Office is working with Audit and General Services to complete implementation of all of the corrective actions, if you will, and all of the findings. Some of the changes have already been implemented. For example, the advanced planning and design program that the city now has in place for capital projects. And some of these changes are still in process, like establishing a process with specific criteria to measure the physical conditions of assets. That's ongoing. It's not fully complete, but the work has started, as an example. One thing I will say is, in all of these findings, there were several findings. They are all in process, and we are making good progress toward them. And really, over the next 6 to 12 months, we should be able to continue working with internal audit and all of the city departments who this audit affects to complete implementation of the recommendations. With that, I think as we saw, Mr. McDowell and Mr. Rieger are here to provide a brief presentation. They also have many of their staff present today, so that after the presentation or during the presentation, if there are questions, we're happy to answer or try to answer any questions that the committee may have. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. McDowell to start the presentation.
All right, thank you, Brent, and thank you, Chairman Driggs and council members. Yes, as it was stated, we presented this to you July 21st, and then the report was issued final July 23rd. And so I just have a few points to make before I turn it over to Phil to go into some details as to the responses to our recommendations. But On this slide, you can see that we received cooperation and appropriate responses to our recommendations with commitments to take actions. And secondly, the actions are in progress to address 22 recommendations as expected, with most of those to be completed later in 2021, fiscal year 2021. And last for this slide, auditors will follow up periodically to ensure that the actions are completed, or we will report otherwise. But we expect, because of the cooperation and reaction we've gotten, that appropriate action will be taken. And overall, we're pleased with the progress that's been taking place to address these things. Next slide, and I will just introduce this slide with a few audit facts and then turn it over, I believe, to Phil. And then also Deputy City Auditor Tina Adams and Audit Supervisor Craig Terrell are online if you have any really tough questions, because they did the bulk of the work on this, although we also employed 2 contractors to help. If you look closely at our audit report, you'll see that we've attached those 2 individual reports from RSM and Towson Solutions. But we initiated this audit, as you can see, now nearly 2 years ago, had 22 recommendations, and we received responses from 8 different departments, and all but just a few, and really all the major responses were agreed upon and actions were begun even during the audit. And so at this point, I'm certainly here to answer questions later, but I'll turn it over to Phil to take you through the 5 areas of the audit and the responses that are in process. Right, Phil?
You would think after working in WebEx for so long that we would know to unmute. My apologies. Greg, thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, Chairman Driggs and members of the committee. As Greg pointed out, the audit's broken up into 5 different sections, and so each of these triangles on this slide represent each of the 5 sections. I'm going to very briefly move through each section to give you a sense of the progress that we're making, and then we'll be available for questions at the end. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the first section of the audit is around project selection and advanced planning. Before I start, I'd be remiss to not really recognize Jennifer Smith, our city engineer. Jennifer and her staff have really taken the lead. Jennifer, as our really chief project manager for the city, she's taken the lead in organizing the city's efforts to respond to the auditor's recommendations, and this is a reflection of that. The first section of the audit addresses project selection and advanced planning around planning for a capital improvement program. There were 3 recommendations. All 3 are in progress as it relates to responding to them in a formal way, and those responses will come through primarily the budget process. And so you'll see as we walk through the budget process a reflection of addressing these recommendations along the way. We go to the next slide, please. The second section of the audit addresses how we estimate our potential expenses related to capital projects. There were 5 recommendations made in the audit. One of those recommendations we've already responded to and completed, 4 in progress, and we plan to have those complete by mid-2021, calendar year 2021. And just a specific note, one of the recommendations is around doing more independent cost estimates. And council will see a contract or a series of contracts on the December 4th council business agenda, where we as city staff are bringing forward contracts for companies that will do independent cost estimates for us. So it's just a reflection of the work that we're doing around becoming better at estimating for our projects. Next slide, please. The third category was around cost management and delivery. And General Services is currently evaluating its processes and practices to enhance our decision-making around project delivery methods, our ability to manage change in projects, and to address risks among projects. And as we do that work and identify gaps and opportunities, we'll be working with audit to implement those recommendations. We're also working on some guidance around how we charge our staff time to capital projects to make sure that we're accurately accounting for the overhead of the projects. And so there were 5 recommendations in this category made. All 5 are in progress, and we expect to have those recommendations addressed by the middle of 2021 as well. Next slide, please. The fourth category of recommendations is around performance reporting, and staff has done a lot of work over the past couple years around this category. Council will have seen the results of that work in the annual project status update that we give to council every year. It's the blue and yellow sheets that we provide council as a part of the budget process that gives council a quick status update of all projects. We've got about 150 projects that are currently active. We've also implemented a project dashboard in the last year, which was a major undertaking by the budget office, and we continue to refine that. What council doesn't often see is all of the work behind the scenes, all the reports that staff use to manage projects on a daily basis. And so we're doing a lot of work on refining that part of our process so that we have better data and can more effectively manage our projects. There were 5 recommendations made. 3 of those recommendations were addressed and are completed. There's 2 in progress, and those 2 will be complete by late 2021. And then next slide, please. The final section or category is around how we manage our contract manager at risk projects. And we're working hard to ensure that we have a formal and logical process on how we go about choosing to use a CMAR method of delivery as our project method. We're also working to ensure that when the guaranteed maximum prices are set on those contracts, that they're done so in a fair and accurate manner. And then finally, we're evaluating how we actually resource these types of projects. Contract manager at risk projects are different than, for example, a design bid build project, and they require a different set of skills, as well as some additional resources to make sure that the city is getting the project that it expected to get. In this category, there were 4 recommendations made by the audit report. 1 of those is complete. 3 are in progress, and we estimate that all of these recommendations will be addressed in early 2021. And so that concludes my part of the presentation, and we're available to answer any questions that the committee might have.
This appears to be an incurious group. I wanted to say, for one, thank you to Mr. McDowell for highlighting these issues in the internal audit. I think, colleagues, you'll recognize these topics from some of the subjects that have come up in our meetings in the past, such as the Cross Charlotte Trail and the overruns there, situations where we had bonds that had actually lapsed, or that the availability of which had to be renewed because we had reached the end of 7 years and they hadn't been taken up yet. So these changes that we're talking about here will significantly tighten up our process. You may recall also that we changed the way we do things and created a $20 million kind of revolving credit account so that we could do some work on proposed projects and not get into the decision that we have been in the past with some of these where they get adopted and approved for funding, and then years go by and nothing happens. So I think we're seeing some significant improvements in the management of our capital spending and in the oversight of the process once we commit to these decisions. And I think I would just ask the staff if we could plan to track the progress of some of these pending items, over a few months. I mean, not month to month, but you've got a bunch of stuff that's still pending in here, and if we could circle back and just verify that we've actually seen it all through, that would be great. And if there are no questions still, all right, good. Let's move on to the next agenda item, and this is about prioritizing funds for hospitality revenues, so capital projects using the hospitality funds. And our CFO has done some great work here to propose a policy which I believe was circulated to everybody. Is that right, Kelly?
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, if you'd like to introduce that, take it away.
Sure, so this is a continuation of a conversation we started July, and I think we've met 2 or 3 times on it, and this document is meant to codify the recommendations that you all had, as well as we worked with strategy and budget, economic development, and CRVA to get their input as well. And hopefully this document reflects everyone's expectations. Just to reiterate, the charge was to come up with a policy to evaluate the capital investments that are funded by hospitality revenues, just to make sure that we're remaining transparent and that the funding and resources are maximized. So without reading the entire thing, I want to highlight on the first page just the guiding principles. Those are obviously, any project we want to do has economic growth, is in compliance with the city policies, and supports tourism and hospitality. But I think what we've learned of the last 9 months and the sensitivity around these taxes is there needs to be a priority, and that's the second bullet there, on how we isolate and protect these revenues from the general city fund. And I think that's what's codified in here. And if nothing else comes out of that, I think that's the thing that we should be most proud of ourselves for accomplishing. So on the second page is just the authority and the overview of the taxes and how we have the rights to use them as per the state legislation. And then it kind of gets into the meat. And that's in section B, and I'm sorry, I don't know who's manning the ship there, but top of the next page, top of page 3. And a lot of the stuff is stuff we had been doing. So the first one is the next year's fund balance requirement. So that is to say, for example, the convention center fund, which fund balance right now, I think $65–70 million. Debt service next year is probably about $25 million. So what that means is of the $65 million, we will always self-restrict the next year's debt service payment. So 25 of the 65 will be kind of restricted. So we'll have 40 million available. And then the second bullet option there is new. And I think what we've learned is that not every year is going to be a growth year. So item 2 is kind of what I call a recession mitigation reserve fund. So of that 40 million that we have left over kind of free and clear, we will say in each one of these funds that we'll take a 25% of the average revenue collected and say, we're going to restrict that from ourselves. So if we get into another situation, recession, we'll call it what it is, that we can maintain, and we're not going to be in dire straits. And I think that's something that we've been doing in practice, but it's nice to codify it. And then just 3 and 4, 4 is actually exists already in the NASCAR Hall of Fame policy, and it was something that when I was reviewing the documents, it was really obvious, why don't we have it for everything else? You know, we're a very large landlord here in the city, and we had committed in the NASCAR policy that we would every year make $250,000 available of the funds for capital maintenance within that facility. It's something we've always funded for the other facilities, but nothing that we actually wrote down that we would commit to. So that's just codifying that as well. And then C, the evaluation criteria, I think is where we relied most on this group for their thoughts around. And that's really articulated in the attachment, which is the form that we will come to you with anytime we want to request funds. And it's going to explain the expected impact from different criteria. So what's the expected economic development impact? And that will include expected job creation, expected investments. It will include a proposed funding plan, as well as the assumptions on what the funds will look like post-financing, as well, and I'm on the top of page 4 now, as the socio-political criteria. So what will the community benefits be? How will we maximize inclusion? I'm sorry, can you scroll up to the next page? Thank you. And then section D is just that we will maintain affordability. So every year as part of the budget process, council approves financial policy metrics. And this is just saying we will follow those metrics. And that's things like, you know, we have present value savings requirements anytime we refund bonds. We will continue to do that. We will issue the bonds in a negotiated or competitive process. It's things of that nature. And then the other piece that I think was really important to this group, and I want to again thank Mr. Murray and his team at CRVA for their input here, was on reporting and evaluation. I think historically there had been some issues with going over costs on projects and kind of waiting until the end to tell everybody. And what this does is it requires that for any active project, whoever the recipient is, that they will report quarterly to this committee a progress update on their project. So if things are starting to look good, they'll come and tell you. If they're starting to look bad, they're going to come and tell you. And then we also commit as part of this exercise is that on at least an annual basis, me, CFO, or economic development on the project side will present an update of where we are on projects and an overview of the financial condition of each of those funds. So that was a lot really fast, but none of it should have been new because we had talked about everything. But I guess at this point, I'd open it up to comments from anyone.
So I just wanted to note what we're talking about here is basically somewhat formalizing the responsibility that council has for approving the capital investments from hospitality funds, not the intention to kind of interfere with the management of the CRVA or decisions, but simply if we're asked to raise our hands and say yes when something is proposed, we should have some sort of frame of reference that led us to approve. And I wonder, Mr. Murray, do you want to comment at all on this, or do you think it needs more work? Does it work for you?
No, I think it works for us fine, and we certainly appreciate being at the table and the work that Kelly did and the rest of the team. So I think it represents well our united spirit about making sure that we have good governance on these.
Good. So this does reflect whatever input you wanted to incorporate. I mean, you've been able to kind of participate or to have your say in terms of how this is formulated. Is that right? I just want to make sure we don't move ahead with something that conflicts with the way you like to operate. Tom, are you there? All right, well, take that as a yes.
Oh, sorry, I'm back. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Yes, I agree with what you just said.
All right,
Councilman Craig. Thank you.
So, Ms. Ajmira.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, good work, Kelly. I reviewed that additional request for funds. There was a form. I think that's a really good start. And if we can get that with any funding request, that would be very helpful. So I think overall this is a good process to have in place.
Thank you. So we've had a couple of conversations about this, and we've had a chance to look at this. Are we in a position to vote on it today? I mean, can I have a motion? Oh, Ms. Eisel, sorry.
Thank you. I just have question to clarify. Is the project management process for the convention center, I guess this is really more for Kelly, is it the same as with any of our other projects? The management of the project management itself of any of the capital projects?
It would be if the city is managing the project like they are the convention center expansion. If we're managing the project, which is typically small projects, and we will use similar governance, but it will be different.
Okay, so who do we have managing these projects? I mean, what's the background of the team that we have doing this?
It's part of general services.
Okay, and is that, I guess that's not really a budget question, I suppose, but, okay.
It's the same organization that runs all your projects.
Okay. All right, I think my line of question is probably better, I'll ask off this committee, because it's not necessarily a budget question. Thank you.
Right, I think we're dealing here with the specific issue of how council reviews and approves projects, and it could be that there's another conversation at a future date on some of the issues that you're alluding to. But I guess my question is, as far as this is concerned, relating to how we appraise these projects and decide whether or not to approve them, do I have a motion to recommend to full council we adopt the policy recommended by the CFO?
So moved.
Second.
All right, then we'll go around. Ms. Isold?
Yes.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes.
Mr. Graham?
Yes.
And I should note, Ms. Johnson is not here because of a family situation. I'm a yes, so that makes it unanimous among those present. And thank you very much. Nice job, really, good job. Okay, our next agenda item is a review of the current mayor and council code of ethics policy. I think you know the conversations that we've had about this and a couple of the issues that came up in the course of the last 6 months to a year. So we're now at a point where we have a proposal for a couple of amendments to the policy, and we're going to hear about that from, I guess, the city attorney or from Lena?
Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Driggs. You all should have a copy of the revised policy that includes some comments and some edits, a red line version. This is the product of the conversation that we had at the last Budget and Effectiveness Committee meeting, and also I have added some comments and suggestions based on my review of the group of ethics complaints that we have right now in front of us, and based on my experience, I wanted to bring a few things to your attention, which I'm happy to go through if there need to be any level of explanation. But just some things that I've seen that I think would make our collective job a little bit easier and more straightforward if they were added or at least considered. You are free to accept those comments, reject those comments, or modify those comments as you see fit, but they are just suggestions from my part. I also want to let you know that I do anticipate, and keep in mind this is outside of my direct control, but I do anticipate hearing from our outside counsel by sometime next week at the latest about where they stand with the review of the complaints. And I know that part of that conversation has included letting me know what they see about our policies, strengths and weaknesses of our policies as well. So there may be more additions for this group to consider, but where we are today, I'm prepared to move forward with what we have in front of you. If I could get you to turn to page 3, section 3B, I think is the first edits that are in there. This was actually brought to our attention from Councilmember Watlington specifically about her desire to have council members bring matters of concern that potentially could be ethical conflicts, or at a minimum, situations in which the appearance of impropriety may exist without a full and clear disclosure and an input from the city attorney. And Ms. Watlington, I don't know if she's on the call or not, but she and I did have a conversation late yesterday afternoon regarding this, and she has made some other amendments or suggestions that are not included in this particular process, but I will let you know what those are. In Section 3B, this is when the mayor or council member believes that their actions, while legal and ethical, may be misunderstood. The original language was should. We've moved that to shall. Seek the advice of the city attorney, and if recommended to, in the discretion of the city attorney, shall publicly disclose. That's that conversation that I would have with any council member who has a question or a concern about something that either has been presented to them or they're contemplating, and they want to run it by the city attorney before moving forward. And we've moved that language up to shall if you believe that your actions, while legal and ethical, may be misunderstood. I did note in the comment that still requires some level of subjectivity on the part of the council member to make a subjective determination that their actions, while legal and ethical, may be misunderstood. So if you don't think that your actions would be misunderstood, then this section isn't going to apply. And I did want to bring that out. And that was the basis of the conversation that Ms. Watlington and I had. And Ms. Watlington suggested that we consider adding some language that relates to the corporate entities and properties that you own or have control over that are disclosed in your the annual statement of interest that all of you are required to produce on an annual basis. And essentially what she is looking for, and I'm still working through some language, but if one of those companies that you have disclosed in your statement of interest, or if property that you own that's disclosed in your statement of interest becomes the part of a transaction with the city, either directly or the subject of a transaction in the case of property, that is a mandatory trigger that would require you to come to the city attorney before you went any further. If you know that a corporation that you've identified or your property is going to be involved in a city transaction, that there's a requirement that you come to the city attorney to get advice. And I'll stop there if there are any questions, and in particular, if other folks may be interested in hearing a little bit more, not so much today, but seeing some language that relates to things that are on your statement of interest form being included as a mandatory trigger for getting that conversation with the city attorney. But I'll stop there and see if there are any questions before I move on.
The Incurious Committee does not have questions. I will just editorialize a little bit here that the real intention of this change is just to ensure that full council has a conversation about something that could be perceived as a conflict early. And I think one of the difficulties we encountered, specifically in the case of Mr. Bakari's not-for-profit company and the proposed transaction, was it seemed that his relationship with that company was not fully understood or hadn't been properly aired or something like that. And in order to avoid a situation where there's a misunderstanding about whether the council needs to address the question, we're trying to capture any of those situations right away and get them out early. So that's what this does. And if there are no questions, why don't you go on to the next item?
Okay. We'll move on to, I've got page 6, and that would be subpart D. And I can go through all of these changes if you'd like. I don't know if there are any questions, or shall I run through all of them? I'm happy to do either.
Can you describe what this does?
Sure.
Why don't we, as opposed to talking about the wording, first of all, just summarize for us. We had a policy before that said that if there was a complaint, you would make a determination about whether it had been submitted in conformity with the requirement for the submission of complaints, and then refer it to what was then called an outside investigator. We changed that so that the outside person it was outside counsel, but nonetheless, we had a situation where you would refer a complaint to somebody outside. And talk about what this does instead of that.
So the main upshot of these changes is that it provides counsel with more discretion and provides the city attorney with more discretion to do more than just a cursory look at the complaint. And essentially how I felt in the majority of these complaints was that I was simply a pass-through. That if the minimum requirements were there as cited in the policy, that I couldn't make any recommendations or have a conversation with the council about whether or not this is the type of complaint that you want to pursue and investigate or have outside counsel to review. Namely because, keep in mind, at the end of all this, it will come back to you for a decision as to whether or not you want to do anything based on what you've heard about the review. And the concern that I have, and this is more me editorializing than you, is that I think some of these complaints, even if they were true, wouldn't have been complaints that you would have felt were rise to the level of seriousness that they should get the full attention of outside counsel and that type of formal review. The policy that you have right now gives no discretion on that. So any complaint, so long as it meets that bare minimum threshold, needs to move forward, whether it's a serious complaint that imputes on the integrity of the entire council, or at least that council member, or something that seems more of a personal nature between a complainant and the council member that wouldn't rise to that level of concern to the full body. There is no ability to distinguish those two. And this gives you options. It doesn't require you to do anything in particular, but it does allow me to take a look at the complaint and then come to you and essentially present the complaint and let you make some decisions that we have here in Section E in particular, where you've got opportunities to refer the complaint for additional consideration or something less than a full review by council, either through mediation or some other process. And this is Section E on page 7. E2, refer the matter to an appropriate regulatory or law enforcement agency. If, for instance, there's a complaint that someone has engaged in criminal activity, that's probably not the type of thing that you as a council, you're not really prepared to investigate. You don't have the tools to do that, but obviously law enforcement does. Or if the matter is better served by a regulatory agency. For instance, if there is an elections violation or something like that, there are entities that review those types of things that I think would be better suited for that. One that I didn't include here, but if something is the matter of an ongoing lawsuit or even a dismissed lawsuit, you may want to not get involved in litigation through an ethics policy. You may want to wait for the litigation to go through. And again, without referencing that, anything, can go forward under the current policy, because there's just no opportunities to do anything else other than once the minimum threshold is met, it gets handed off to outside counsel. And the third, Section E3, does then give you that same ability that you have now to refer the matter to outside counsel if you've made that determination that the allegations of facts are of a serious nature that you feel outside counsel review is warranted. These are my suggestions to you to consider, just to give you more options. You still have the option of referring everything to outside counsel if you want to, but if you see complaints that you feel may not necessarily rise to the level of that level of concern to where you would even consider taking punitive actions against one of your fellow colleagues, that there are other options that are available. And I did, I think one of the notes mentioned, I have concerns about the word frivolous. Frivolous is very subjective. It means different things to different people. And if you're given the option of you either have to find it frivolous or you have to do a full scale complaint, I'm concerned that either or option on the word frivolous is probably not the best situation for you to be in. And I've traded that word for phrasing that is essentially, does it rise to the level of a serious nature that you want to move forward with that. So you won't see frivolous in this action. And the rest of the edits are fairly straightforward. One of the things in section 2B, that was the issue where, the city attorney, if I determine that the minimum threshold hasn't been met, I'm supposed to, contact the complainant, but there doesn't seem to be any sort of end game in terms of the back and forth or when the complainant needs to respond. So I did add a 7 business day from the date of me notifying, or the city attorney notifying the complainant that their complaint has not met the minimum threshold, and give them the opportunity to cure that. But you don't want that back and forth going on, and it doesn't state that specifically in the current policy. So those are the main changes to that, Lena. I don't know if you see anything particular that you want to highlight for them.
Thank you. Now, I was just going to explain, so we struck the investigation section based on the discussions we had at the last committee meeting, and that was in part because the revised section 2 now provides different avenues and options, both for the city attorney and for council. So it seems like the investigation portion would not be necessary.
So if I may kind of paraphrase, the complaint comes in, you would make the preliminary determination that you make under our existing policy as to whether it's properly submitted. If it's not, you work for 7 days with the complainant to resolve the issue and to achieve a properly submitted complaint. And then you, if it is, then you come to the council and you say to the council, this is the complaint. And at that point, you are able to go beyond that narrow role that you played in making the initial determination, and you can say, okay, this is what it's about, and if you like, here's my take on it. Council then can decide one of 3 things: whether to resolve this by council, whether to send it to some regulatory authority, or whether to send it to an outside investigator.
That's correct.
Right? So that's the gist of it. And the idea here is that I think we were kind of ambushed a little bit by a process in which any complaint that came in immediately went to somebody outside and therefore got elevated to a thing.
Right. And
Council, with this, has more discretion as a body to decide whether the thing, the complaint deserves to be a thing, and if it doesn't, to kind of let it end there. Or, if the majority of council agrees that it requires some further action by us or by others to take those steps, recognizing that the only real remedy council has is some sort of sanction.
Correct.
Which is unchanged from where we were before.
Correct.
So it would be good if we could kind of move on this fairly quickly as a committee, because we're in a state of limbo in effect right now where we decided not to process complaints, and luckily there has only been one that I'm aware of since the batch that we sent outside went out. So we don't have a big issue here, but the fact is that we are not processing complaints at the moment pending the adoption of a new policy. So it would be great if we were able to move forward with this one. I don't know if the committee feels that we're able to do so today. Mayor, welcome.
How are you doing?
We're talking ethics. Do you want to join us? No. I thought you might not.
I think I try to avoid getting into those kind of discussions. They generally like getting in the political ones.
Is there anything else you'd like to say for the order of the meeting?
Well, I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving and enjoyed themselves. And
Thank you.
we're getting accustomed to wearing our mask all the time. So, okay.
Thank
you guys
you.
carry on, right?
All right. So we could take some action and not necessarily close the book on the whole question of ethics, because apparently there are other suggestions. This committee, if it wanted to could move ahead with a recommendation to the full council based on this draft. And I just need to know what other members think, and Ms. Ajmera has raised her hand.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Baker, you had mentioned that we will see some update from the outside reviewer next week, and as a result of that, we might see some changes. Is that correct?
That's correct. I just wanted to bring that to your attention in terms of how this is coming together, to make sure that you're aware that I do expect to hear something from them next week. And there may be an opportunity there based on what they come back with that inspires you to want to consider additional edits. But we are close to the end of this process, yes.
Got it. So, since we might see some additional updates next week, including some of the changes that Ms. Watlington had mentioned in her email and in conversation with Mr. Baker, we might see some additional edits. So I would like us to sort of see a comprehensive document without, so I'm not ready at this point, knowing that we will see additional changes. So I would be interested in hearing from what the outside reviewers suggest based on their review, and then also see what additional changes come as a result of Mr. Attorney's conversation with Ms. Watlington.
Okay, very reasonable. Ms. Isel?
Mr. Driggs, may I just add something? I was just, to be clear, the outside counsel is not rewriting or reviewing the policy. They're doing the review of the complaints. As a result of that summary, there may be some information or recommendations they provide that would cause us to. But I just wanted to make clear that that was clear to folks, so that don't expect a rewrite of a policy coming from them as well.
No, but I think the point you're making is that when we see their reaction to the complaints we
Right.
got, that
There may
might
be.
inspire some recommendations.
That's correct.
It may.
And I think I hadn't heard that before, so if that's the case, I'm inclined to agree with Ms. Ajmera that we might want to take on board any potential modifications that we know about, Ms. Watlington and outside. Ms. Isel?
Well, that would be three of us then. I think that what Ms. Ajmera said makes sense to me, that if there are, additional recommendations coming, let's take a moment, let those all come in, and then put them forward to the full council.
Okay.
Also, Mr. Driggs, I just wanted to quickly comment. So when council had made changes to this policy, I think that was a couple of years ago, the only time I think we are really seeing that in practice would be the review. So I don't know, I was looking at the notes from the last discussion they had. I don't know if the expected outcome from those from the review would meet what council had expected back a couple of years ago, or it might be something totally different, and that might change. This recommendations. I guess what I'm trying to say is the first time we are really testing whether this existing policy works or not.
Right. I'm not sure I heard all that. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So we need to meet again as a committee to talk about the retreat, since we have been charged with reviewing the plan for the retreat, and I think we need to do that in the month of December. Is that right?
Yeah.
So if we could plan by our next meeting date, which I expect
We need-
to be.
Mr. Driggs, can you turn your microphone on?
I'm sorry. I keep getting it off when it should be on, and vice versa. I'm not good at this. We need to meet again to talk about the retreat, since we've been charged as a committee with going through with the manager the proposal for our retreat. And we could put on the agenda for that meeting, which needs to take place in December, an update, which with any luck will take on board. And if you could circulate that draft ahead of the meeting, The hope would be that then we will be in a position to adopt this, because, as I say, we're kind of in limbo right now. It would be good if we could close this out. And I think that's the way we'll plan to move forward, without objection.
I do think if I could add, if there's something in there that you've seen, even today, that's a real problem for you, or you've got a concern, you can let me know that now, or, you know, anytime after the meeting, just so I've got a sense of what would be considered and what wouldn't be considered. And certainly, I don't expect that there are going to be any additional, you know, big changes that would come out of what I anticipate I'm going to get next week. But if there's something in here that you really, really don't like in particular, please let me know.
Right. I hope we can leave this meeting with a consensus that this committee broadly supports the idea of having these ethics complaints referred back to council. I mean, if we have a disagreement about that, we should know about it. And because ideally what will come next is just a refinement of this and not a completely new direction. Again, the goal being to try and finalize the committee's work on this for our next meeting in a couple of weeks. So with that, barring any further comments? Ms. Ajmera, did you want to speak again?
Yes, you know, I do have some technical questions, so I wouldn't say, you know, right now I don't feel comfortable. I have some technical questions. I will reach out to Mr. Baker and get those addressed.
That's good. Perfect.
Good. And so you know the timeline we're on. Just get to him as soon as you can, so we're ready in a couple of weeks, if you could. Okay, the last item has to do with the, on our agenda, the council virtual meeting provisions. And this relates to the action that we took, which, if you recall, was that council members could participate indefinitely and without any limiting conditions virtually in our council meetings. That does raise some issues, and our city attorney is going to talk about those.
Yes. So I think I've given you some information about your council procedure, particularly Rule 28, which is telephonic and electronic attendance at meetings. You will need to, based on the action that you took, I think back in October 13th or 14th, you will need to marry up that action with this policy, because right now they're at odds. Since the procedures wasn't on the agenda, you weren't able to make changes to the procedure. But I think this group is the group that would take a look at the procedures and try to marry that up. The bottom line is that there will need to be another conversation with the full council about Section 28. As you know, I won't assume you do know, but the virtual meetings that we're having right now are under the authority of 166A 1924. The main thing is 166A, which is the emergency statute in North Carolina. We're able to participate in these meetings in part because of the state of emergency that's been issued by the governor back in March. And so long as that state of emergency is out there, we're governed under that particular section, which allows for the virtual meetings. I have to believe that at some point in time, the state of emergency will go away, and we would revert back to our quote-unquote normal council meetings and the procedures that are provided under the general statutes that we have going forward. Section 20, Rule 28 is Charlotte's attempt at providing a procedure whereby council members can participate in both committee meetings and full city council meetings. And I can tell you anecdotally that this has been a topic of discussion among city attorneys and the School of Government for a long time in terms of what would be the procedures for participating remotely, since there isn't a specific state law that spells it out like there is now under Chapter 166. But again, when that's no longer available to us, we're back to the statutes that we've had. And there is, I can't say that there's agreement on whether or not we can participate. We can have you all participating virtually or not. I shared with you all the School of Government's blog back in 2013, where they spelled out some of the issues, some of the concerns, and some ways in which you can mitigate some of those concerns, particularly if you've got less than a quorum that's going to be out and participating virtually. They make a suggestion that any votes that occur have enough votes at the meeting present that the one or two people that are participating virtually won't make a difference if their vote is somehow legally excluded from consideration if there's a challenge. There really is no case law on this. And I know where I used to work had a similar provision in terms of virtual participation. And essentially what a lot of municipalities have done is to allow very limited cases of virtual participation in rare situations of emergencies or what have you. I have not seen a case really anywhere that allows unlimited virtual participations, again, in that non-emergency situation. And with the inclusion of the word indefinite to that particular motion, that's the situation that we find ourselves in now, with the idea that there are no restrictions whatsoever to participating remotely in a normal council meeting. Again, there's not statutory authority on that for or against it, but I would anticipate that there would be if a community has no restrictions whatsoever, and just the concept of the entire council being at home while citizens are in the council chambers, I think would certainly, you should expect to have some legislation on that if that's the direction that folks go. So this is something that you all will need to take into consideration as you're going forward, and really you're talking about reviewing and understanding Rule 28 A and B of your Rules of Civil Procedure, and again, under committee meetings, council members are free to participate if they can't attend by reason of illness or injury with 48 hours notice, and you have full authority to vote and participate in the meeting in that particular situation. For council meetings, you have the ability to participate virtually for emergency meetings, as is, that's the first sentence of Section B. And then, council members may attend regular and special meetings by telephone or other electronic means where, one, it's necessary to achieve a quorum, two, attendance is precluded due to weather, civil unrest, and emergencies, and three, the meeting needs to be continued or to take action on matters that cannot be delayed. And that's really the issue that you'll need to address right now, because right now you are very limited to participating virtually in a council meeting under Rule 28B, and that's something that you'll have to take up.
So do we have any hands up? Ms. Isolt.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm looking at this, I'm sorry to look at this in advance, but I'm a little confused with A. I always had thought that A doesn't seem to refer to emergency meetings. It's just saying, that's just an in general comment, right? That council members can attend committee meetings by phone if they're unable to because of illness, to attend in person. I always thought that we were not able to vote in that case. And B says if it's for emergency meetings because of whatever the reasons are, that could vote electronically. So I guess
I think I can help you out with that one. So A is really for a meeting like this, a committee meeting. It's not for a council meeting, just for the committee meetings that you can do that. And B is for council meetings, and it starts off with you can participate virtually in any emergency meeting. Those are very rare, and obviously because of the emergency, you may not be able to physically be together. And then the rest of that section relates to, and that gets to what you've been told in the past about how you can participate in a council meeting.
So this is the way it's written now, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and okay. So are we being asked to change it or to leave it as is?
Well, right now, it is at odds with the motion that was passed that said that you can have virtual meetings indefinitely. And at some point in time, when the state of emergency goes away, this conflict is going to be triggered. And that's why the referral has been made to this committee to consider any changes to Rule 28, and then the full council will need to make a determination as to where it wants to go with this.
Okay, so okay, now I see what you're saying, that when that motion was made indefinitely, I sort of took to understand until council votes otherwise, but it is in fact in conflict with 28B because we are still operating under emergency criteria, the governor's emergency
Right.
criteria.
So long as the state of emergency exists, it's not an issue. But when the state of emergency goes away, then there will be the conflict will be clear, and it's our hope that the conflict can be resolved prior to the state of emergency going away.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
So the way I look at this is the vote that we took signaled the intent of council to liberalize the basis on which members could participate virtually compared to the way we were doing things before and the way that's provided in our existing policy. And we went ahead and we did that. We really liberalized it. We threw it wide open. And I think the point we're trying to make today is we actually need to be a little more thoughtful about what the circumstances are. And if you haven't read the paper by the School of Government, I strongly encourage you to do so. There's a very good discussion in there about the kind of pros and cons and the issues. One thing they raised, for example, is that if council were to take an action, the majority vote in favor of which was virtual, that could give rise to legal action. That could actually cause a challenge, the outcome of which they were not able to guarantee one way or another. So there are reasons why we should do more work, and it doesn't, without prejudice to the concept of allowing freer kind of options to council members to participate virtually, but we have to think about, do we require an in-person quorum or majority? And are there any limits on the number of times that any council member can participate virtually? Should we have some mechanism that ensures that council members participate in person at least a certain % of the time? Those are the kind of things we need to think about, and we're just bringing this up now because before the state of emergency ends, we should achieve a reconciliation and more clarity in our own city policies on these matters. And Mr. Attorney, what do you think the best way is to proceed? Do you want to make a recommendation to us as to what the new policy might look like? Or do we need to have a fuller conversation on council about, I mean, the trouble we had when we talked about this before was a lot of these issues that we're alluding to right now, the kind of controls that you might have on virtual, we had not been briefed, right? And everybody was acting in kind of a vacuum in terms of the issues. So that paper and your comments should help to get us to the point where we can talk about these things and identify a consensus on council as to what we really want to do. Again, I think it was apparent that a majority feels that we ought to have more liberal provisions for virtual participation. So what's the limit? I don't think anybody really thinks that we ought to be able all to be at home and with faces on screens in front of a chamber full of our constituents. So, you know, how do we define that? Do you want to make some recommendations, or?
What I'd like to do with the chair and the committee's permission is to come back to you probably not in 2 weeks, but at your January meeting with a recommendation for amendments to Rule 28. They will also include what other communities around the state, because this is really more of a state law issue, you know, in terms of how meetings are run rather than a national issue. But we may take a look at what other peer cities are doing as well. But I'd like to have some recommendations and also bring to you what other communities are doing, so you've got a full opportunity to consider the options. I do anticipate that there will be more, given the fact that we know now that we can actually still manage local governments in a virtual fashion, that I do expect some liberalization of this. I don't think that we'll ever get to the stage where, even in theory, a procedure that says all of you can be at home while the citizenry are in chambers, I just don't think that's going to fly. But something along the lines of, so long as there's a majority of the council, there's a quorum physically present or something like that. It's just some things that you can consider. But I'd like to bring that all to you at your January meeting for consideration and possibly decision.
Ms. Ajmira?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I like Patrick's idea of bringing forward recommendation for us where we can have a discussion as a full council. I do have a question on A, where it says for committee meetings, there needs to be at least 48 hours in advance notice. So if there's a reason of illness or injury, I guess there might be a situation where a member would not know 48 hours in advance. So I guess what do we do then?
So that's something that you would need to consider. Again, keep in mind the time that this Rule 28 was put into place is probably at a time when the technology is quite different than it is today. So that's a conversation that you probably need to have with the staff, and I can have that conversation offline with them in anticipation of the January meeting. But a 48, you're right. If you break your leg or you become ill, you may not have 48 hours because it almost sounds like you're planning on not attending. An injury and illness tends to simply just pop up. But those are the types of things that we can look at because maybe the 48-hour rule isn't appropriate anymore. That the technology is available to where, at least at the committee level, folks can quickly patch in virtually, and you don't need 2 full days of notice to be able to do that.
The only thing about that is if we do have some sort of in-person requirement, then we would want to have advance notice of intentions just to know whether or not we have a situation taking shape where there weren't enough people in person. So we want to be able to plan the meeting and hope that anybody that intends to participate virtually will be able to so indicate in advance, not necessarily 48 hours, but we do have to have some room to make some phone calls or address any failure to meet another requirement we may adopt as to the in-person attendance. Anybody else? Ms. Isolt?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's something that could easily be fixed. And, even if saying at the discretion of the mayor or whatever, if it is a last minute thing, because to Mrs. Mira's point, usually it's going to be last minute if somebody said they were coming and they can't. But what I hear you saying, Patrick, is that in terms of checking with cities in the state, I'd like to ask if you cities our size, because I am hearing from other cities, large cities, that they're having a heck of a time with their council dynamics being virtual. I know Nashville has rented out their convention center. Now they've got a 40-person council, but it just was getting so unruly by doing it virtual that they just felt it really important to be able to be in person. And there is a discussion going on amongst cities about how you handle this. So I really think it would be useful to talk to other cities, not just about what their policies are, but what their experience has been. I'm hearing corporations saying this too, that I've talked to business leaders that have said they're trying to figure out ways to at least get some of their teams together in person, because it's just not the same experience, and relationships start breaking down when you're all online and you're not communicating with each other in the same room. So I know it's tough, it's a crummy situation that we're in, but I personally would like to see this language remain, that we do this as long as we're under emergency declarations, you know, maybe with some more flexibility, but, you know, please check with other cities and see how they're also handling this.
Will do.
Appreciate it.
I concur with that. This is Malcolm. And I guess it begs the question about our retreat in January in terms of whether or not we're going to have a virtual option or we all need to be around the table. I would prefer the latter simply because some of the reasons that the Mayor Pro Tem outlined, but I just think as we begin the process of preparing for the retreat that we answer that question as well.
We're going to talk about the retreat in the context of the current 10-person limit on meetings and also the topics to be discussed. So I'm with you, by the way. I would prefer to have that session take place in person. I don't think this committee is going to resolve this question. So what we can do here is work with the attorney to kind of frame the conversation, identify the issues, make some suggestions. And Ms. Eisel, to your point, if we impose some sort of restrictions on virtual participation, like you can only participate 3 times in a quarter, any council member can, other than under certain emergency conditions, et cetera, we might be able to achieve a substantial majority in person and still provide that flexibility for people from time to time to just call in if their situation warrants. I think what we are trying to avoid is the situation where people feel that it's okay all year to just call in from home, and possibly a majority or all of council starts to do something like that. So the question is, how do we circumscribe this to give individual members some latitude on this point and not go down that slope to where an in-person group of citizens is looking at a bunch of screens? So we will take that up again in January. Any further comments on that, Donata? All right. Anything else? Do we need to talk about our next meeting date?
Presumably, we'll try to do the next meeting before Christmas. It sounds like 2 weeks from now may be a decent target, but we'll, of course, work through constituent services with your guys' schedules. And the only two, based on what we've heard today, the only 2 topics would be the annual strategy session agenda and the ethics policy. So we can probably make it a 1-hour meeting, presumably.
Right. So due to the incurious nature of the committee, we're actually done 15 minutes early. So we'll wait for about 15 minutes, and then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Hey, I think it's incurious. I think we're really on top of this, and we just are all...
We are all over this thing. I love incurious council members. Anyway, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor, hang up, please.